Hello everybody, and this is Rudra Pradhan here. Welcome you all to BMD course, and today we are here to discuss about the descriptive analytics. So, in the last couple of lectures we have discussed various issues or and requirements. In fact, we have discussed the descriptive statistic, association statistics, the concept of probability and probability distributions. So, now connecting to all these lectures, so we will discuss now the concept called as sampling distributions. So, sampling and sampling distribution. So, this is this is what the objectives behind this particular lectures, that to sampling and sampling distribution, and the structure is to understand the need of sampling and importance of appropriate sampling, knowing the difference between population parameter and sample statistics, knowing different types of sampling techniques and their limitations, understand the structure of various sampling distributions, and finally, I will show you some kind of examples with the Excel spreadsheets. So, this is what the discussion is all about, and the kind of requirement is like this. The what is actually means we like to address the typical structures: M of sampling, connection with the probability distributions, connection with the sampling distribution. Then we like to connect with the central limit theorems, and then types of samples. This is the typical structures or highlights of this particular lecture. So, what we have discussed earlier. So, in any kind of empirical process or in problem investigation. So, there is always issue about the sample and population, and what I have already mentioned, every time the experiment or empirical processing will be sample specific. So, you want to know what is the kind of population structure, and corresponding to the population structures you have to draw a samples, and then the investigation will be done with the help of this is sampling only. So, a sample is a subset of the population, which we have already highlighted. So, it may have a good samples, it may have a bad samples. So, since it is a kind of basket where you can pick up various samples, then if the sample is not actually good, then you can actually reject, then you pick up another sample and then test as per your requirement. So, in fact, the particular investigation process is very kind of continuous in nature. So, the if your theory is very accurate and the problem is well connected, then sometimes with the help of samples. So, you have to actually validate the particular fact or observations, and if the sample will not be supportive, that means typically if the sample is a bad one, then obviously, so it may not actually support to your theory and models. So, that is why we typically follow sensitivity analysis and robustness check to validate whether the particular sample is very accurate to predict certain kind of situation or to test particular situation. So, the sample will be good representative or sometimes non-representative samples. A researcher has to obtain a sample that represents the population. So, that means the idea is actually, so you have to try to pick up one after another samples, and then you try to give conclusion or kind of findings which can general in nature, and that will be population specific. So, that means actually it is a kind of method of induction. So, you increase one after another process. So, that means you can increase the sample also with a given kind of structure. So, starting with 100 observation, 150 observation, 200 observation, then you check the variation actually. If it is more or less coming similar kind of results, then obviously, so this will validate your theory and the kind of models. So, that is the beauty of actually the game between sampling to population. So, that is how you have to understand what is the specific difference between sample and population, but most of the times our structure is actually sample specific. So, here means we have to empirically test the particular process or the kind of model through in the process of sampling only. So, now the question is why samples, because the means it is a very tricky kind of situation, because it is not possible for a researcher or any kind of organization or any kind of individual to gather all the sample which can be represented by a kind of population. Since you are not in a position to touch all the samples, so as a result, so you cannot say that this is a kind of population. Since you are less than all samples, by default this particular structure is a sample specific, it cannot be population. If you say population, means all the sample points will be covered altogether. Since nobody can in a position to collect all the samples, then your every time the particular experiment or the particular testing will be sample specific. That is how so these are the typical understanding. So, why you need actually sample, not the kind of population, because it is not possible for a researcher to gather all kind of information. So, methods of sampling. So, there is a probabilistic kind of structure and there is a kind of non probabilistic structures. So, you can have the sample from friends, family, then students in a class or something kind co-workers in a workplace, then convenient sampling, volunteers. So, these are judgmental sampling, then some these are all ways actually you have to collect the samples. It means what I have mentioned, actually when you collect the information, you must have a kind of description. So, the kind of reporting will be cross sectional specific and time specific, but what is the particular cross sectional structure and what is the particular time series structure, that itself will give you some kind of clarity and understanding between the sample versus populations. But before you start the particular process, you must be very clear that what is exactly the sample and what should be the structure of the population. Of course, you are not in a position to say what is the exact population, but you should know what is the population basket altogether. Then you can pick up a samples, and there should be some kind of convergence between sample and population. Every time our approach is actually sample to populations. Okay, so that you can generalize the particular findings or generalize the particular structures, and accordingly the management decision can be applied. So, that is how it is a kind of continuous process till you get the kind of outcome as per your requirement. So, methods of samplings, again the compared to previous ones, this is the probabilistic kind of situations, and most of the cases we use probabilistic samples for kind of empirical testings. So, the like the previous lecture we have discussed the concept called as a random variables. So, here also there is a structure called as a random samplings. So, each number has an equal probability of being selected, right. Then there is a systematic structure, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, multi-stage sampling, and means these are all various ways to gather the informations, and means the idea is that it is a kind of art actually. If you follow the particular structure, then obviously the accuracy of the data and the accuracy of sample will be very perfect. If your structure will not be specified as per the requirement, then by default the inputs are not correct, then obviously you do not expect the kind of output and the kind of findings. So, so what is actually the kind of requirement that you should actually focus on a kind of samples which is as per your need. That means you follow the best kind of sampling structure, so that your sample or your data will be very effective and very efficient as per your requirement is concerned. So, now so aims of sampling, actually sometimes we sometimes with the kind of limitation subject to cost, time, etc. So, you have to be do some kind of compromise, but still the suggestion is that you must have always accurate sampling as per the requirement, and try to have more number of sample points, so that the kind of findings will be efficient and accurate. If your sample is not good one and the sample size is not good one, then obviously this will affect the kind of analysis by using any kind of complex analytics tools, and then the findings will be not efficient. So, that as a result you are supposed to follow a particular structure where your sampling or sample point should be very efficient one, right. So, this will give you better predictions. So, these are all probability concept which we have already discussed. So, I am not going in details. So, the value of the probability will be 0 to 1, and then the kind of sampling structure follow particular probability sampling will follow this particular principle. And now I will give you a little bit hint here actually. What is the probability distribution and number of girls in family with 2 children? So, these are all actually possible samples, means you should know the trick how to gather the kind of sample points, right. So, we have already discussed in details in the case of probability and probability distribution. With so many probability distribution we have highlighted, and this is the series of samples possible cases you have to detect, and then you have to predict the particular requirement as per the need of the business. So, this is the kind of with the available data you have to predict the kind of structures and try to find out the particular pattern probability distribution pattern. So, that your prediction can be effective again as per the business requirement. So, the again how about family of 3. So, when your number of girls. So, these are the kind of possible cases, and this can be generated samples, and then on the basis of these are all actually how to apply the trick and gather the information. Once you gather the information, then you are in a position to address the problems, right. So, it may be for instance, number of girls in 3 family, it can be start with 0, it can be start with 1, it can be start with 2, and so on. So, if it is 0, then that means all the family having actually boy boy boy. So, if it is 1, then it may be a kind of in the case of first one, it may be case of second one, or it may be case of third one only. So, likewise it is the kind of structure through which you have to generate the sample. So, that means if your problem is very accurate, understanding is very accurate. So, there is no problem to generate the samples. So, like this. So, this again if you plot, then it will give you the kind of distributions of this particular sampling. So, once you know the distribution, accordingly you have to apply the particular distribution and predict the kind of environment. So, how about a family of 10? So, that means I am just giving you the clue of indication. Once you add up something more and more, then the kind of complexity will start increasing, and that is how you have to follow the particular pattern which will be as per your requirement. Then a family size increases, then means simple starting with the probability distribution, then you follows the kind of typical complex distribution like binomial distributions, then a normal distribution and something like that. So, this is the kind of case which we have already highlighted, but the pattern of distribution will be follow like this. And this is a kind of normal distribution pattern, and means once you have these samples, you have to just plot and see how is the kind of shape. If your shape is not actually accurate, and then your analysis will not be accurate. So, you must be very careful how is the particular shape, and as per the shape you have to structure the data, and then you connect with a particular analytics tools to solve the business problem. Then there is a concept called as sampling distribution. Actually, we have a 3 different structure altogether: sample, sampling distribution, and population. So, that means suppose you have a kind of basket, and in the basket you can call as a population. Then in the basket you pick up small samples, let us say sample size of 50, 30, 150 like this. Then you try to find out sample statistics. Now, all the sample statistics will be having another kind of basket, and that will create a kind of distribution. That in simple language you can call as sampling distribution. So, you have to follow. So, when you will go for this particular process, so some kind of normalization you are bringing. So, and every times the normalization or normalized data is always good fit for any kind of modeling. So, you try to bring the kind of accuracy and the kind of normality, so that your business can be analyzed very effectively, and that will be as per your requirement, right. So, this is sampling distribution of so the kind of rules you have to follow, and when you are picking up a particular sample. So, you have a sample statistic and you have a population statistic, and when you are calculating means when you are picking up a particular sample, your sample statistics should be converted to population statistic. If the difference will be very high, that means the sample particular choice of samples may not be actually very accurate. So, your sample statistics, you try to pick up the sample which is very close to population parameter. If it is deviating from the population parameter, then the biasness will be very high, and that biasness will affect your business forecasting or business for predictions. As a result, your management decision will not be very effective. So, you must be very careful how you have to pick up these samples, and the sample which you will pick up, that will be very close to population parameters. Otherwise, the if that is not the case, then there is a high chance that the population's parameters are actually misspecified. So, you try to find out actually the structure through which you can the entire theme and entire structure will be again rearranged as per your requirement. So, this is another kind of sampling rule. So, I am just skipping this one. So, the thing is that some cases so far as population is concerned, it is called as infinite population and finite population, but whatever may be the case. So, we actually try to follow the kind of patterns that the pick up the sample which can be very close to the population parameters. So, here the when we are following a kind of structure random sampling from a normally distributed population. So, these are the typical structure you have to follow, and capital N stands for actually population parameter, and this is what actually population parameter, then this is a sample kind of structure, and a distribution will be called as efficient distribution. Here sample statistic will be converted to population statistics, and then sample mean will be equal to population mean, but sample standard deviations will be closely connected with population standard deviations. So, this is the kind of conversions you have to connect with when you are connecting sample with populations. So, now, so I will give you the little bit more details about this particular structure. Okay. So, this is a kind of structure called as central limit theorem, and this theorem gives the idea that when you increase the sample size one after another, then the particular distribution will be close to normal distribution. We have actually discussed couple of distribution, but best distribution in so far as prediction and forecasting is concerned is called as normal distributions. Now, with the help of sample with the help of central limit theorem structures. So, when you increase the sample size indefinitely, then most of the distribution will be follows the normal distribution, and normal distribution, once the data will follow a particular normal distribution, then the outcome and the findings or the kind of decision making process will be very efficient and very pretty. Sometimes we will normalize the data, we will restructure the data, and try to bring the kind of distribution which will be having actually kind of equal spreads. Okay. So, it should be like symmetrical in nature. So, that is one of the strategy or skill you have to develop, how you have to bring skewed data to actually symmetrical data. So, that your business find kind of check or business requirement may be very effective so far as any kind of analytics tools are concerned. So, like this is the kind of structure. So, these are the kind of classic examples how we have to connect the central limit theorem and indicating that the particular distribution will be following actually normal distributions. Okay. So, this is the kind of structure which actually followed a kind of skewed distribution, that is actually not normal. Then again with increasing samples. Okay. So, now the particular distribution will be following a normal distribution. So, that is why So, what will you do? Sometimes increase the sample size, that is as per the central limit theorem. So, the distribution will be followed by a normal distribution, or sometimes you can restructure the data or transport the data, so that the distribution can be little bit close to the normal distribution. But the best structure to follow the normal distribution is the increasing apply the increasing sample policy. So, that the distribution will follow normal distribution, and then once you get the kind of symmetrical spread or equal distribution, this will help you lot to take management decision as per your requirement. This is the classic example of probability distributions, and followed by a simple probability structure. Then this is called as a interval probability structure, which we have already discussed in unit 2 and in the case of probability distribution. So, that is why I am not discussing in details, but you just follow up the kind of difference between simple probability distributions with a kind of absolute structure and in the kind of interval structures. And then in the particular structure you have to follow and generate the data. So, I will take you to the Excel sheet and show you how the particular sampling will be generated as per your requirement, right, as per your requirement. In the second unit, we have discussed H look, V look to indicate a particular structure as per your requirement. So, here in these structures, with the help of probability structure and probability, and with V look, then you can specify the particular requirement. Again, so the idea is that Excel spreadsheet has a kind of advantage to predict the particular business as per the feasibility or requirement. And this is another kind of Excel environment through which particular distribution can be generated. And let me take you to the kind of case where we can discuss many more typical issues. Discuss various probability distributions, and in fact, I like to highlight that how the sampling can be generated through a particular distributions. Last lectures we followed kind of structures with a particular values of the random variables, and if the particular distribution will be follow, then what is the probability of that particular random variable. Here we are just following in a different kind of angles with with a particular population specifications. Then we have to generate this kind of some values of the random variables. So, now you see here. So, this is the kind of uniform distributions, and I have actually already designed a kind of structures to justify that corresponding to the previous discussion in the case of probability and probability distribution. Here the case of sampling and sampling distribution. Here you have to generate the samples. In the earlier case, we have a sample specific, then following a particular probability distribution, you are trying to find out what is the probability of a particular happening. But here with the help of kind of population parameters, you are generating the values of the random variables. That is the difference between probability distribution and the kind of sampling distribution. Like we have discussed various distribution here, and so, some of the distribution I am highlighting here. In the case of uniform distribution, so it is the kind of classic example here. So, I will take you to the particular examples. Let us put here, and this is uniform distribution. You put actually uniform distribution here, and okay. So, I will directly show you here. In the case of uniform distribution, but just you put random between two different intervals, then by default it will be giving you a kind of distribution pattern, and that will give you the uniform distribution. In fact, this is not actually very this is not a typical actually distribution which can be used for a big kind of problems or complex problem, but the other distribution will be very useful for kind of prediction and forecasting of business problem. Let us say binomial distribution. Okay, so we have already discussed the binomial distribution. Now, I am connecting here the kind of binomial distribution. So, let us say start with same put equal to sign here, then you put binomial command, in the case of earlier we have a put binomial distribution. In this case, in the sampling distribution, you put binomial inverse. Then if you put binomial inverse, then it will ask you, just click there and it will ask you the trials. So it will be, let us say 10, then it will connect with the probability, that is 0.2, and then it is a kind of alpha. Okay. So, what will it do here? So, okay, let me give you another look. Okay. Okay, so you have to put actually random value, so that otherwise it cannot be calculated. So, put equal to sign here, then put binomial distribution in this link. Okay, so then it will ask you to trials, that will be put actually say 10 like previous examples, then probability value, so 0.2, and then the kind of random. Okay, click here and then close the loop, and okay, so and close, then you will find here. So, this will give you actually kind of structure about the binomial distribution. So, you just drag it, then it will be generated like this. So, this is actually the kind of sampling a kind of distribution which follows a kind of binomial distribution. So, that means we have already discussed the kind of structure in the case of binomial distribution. Here, so we like to generate the values of the a random variable. Similarly, you come to the normal distribution case. So, in the normal distribution case, so these are actually values of the random variables. So, now how you have to randomly generated actually. So, now the same structure you have to follow here. So, you go to this particular equal to signs, then put actually normal distributions, and again, so this is the normal distribution follow structure, but we need actually sampling distribution for normal distribution pattern. Then this is actually probability distribution. So, probability distribution you put here random, then okay. So, close the loop, then you put the kind of mean value, and then you put the standard deviations as per the earlier kind of fixation. Okay. So, then you just put the enters, then this will be generated, and then you just drag it as per the kind of if you want you can increase any extent. So, that the sample will be by default will be generated. This is the sampling distribution so far as a normal distribution is concerned, and similarly we have a option for log normal distributions. In the case of log normal distributions, again the structure will be follow like this. So, I have already written here. So, similarly you just put randomized value, then give the specification about the mean and samples, automatically it will give you some kind of value. For instance, let us say you put here, then you put the kind of log normal distributions, then you just click here, then put random structures. Okay. So, then close the loop, then indicate the kind of mean, let us say put 50, then you put actually 100, then again close the loop and enters, it will be randomly generated. So, again scroll it, and just like dragging, so you will get sampling distribution. So, that means depending upon the kind of structures, so you have to follow a kind of pattern, that is sampling distribution pattern. So, the whole idea actually is like this, that what will you do. So, corresponding to a particular distribution, you just know the parameter structure or the kind of mass function structure. On the basis of that, actually Excel spreadsheet will help you a lot to create a sampling distributions, right. So, so we have a structure called as probability distributions, and corresponding to the probability distribution we have a structure called as sampling distribution. So, this is actually well connected. So, in the probability distribution case, we are actually calculating values of the a random variable for a particular case, but here we are actually generating the kind of values of the random variable subject to probability mass function is concerned, whether it is a uniform distribution or binomial distributions or normal distribution or log normal distribution, whatever may be the kind of structures. So, now take you to this particular structure. So, what I like to say that so probability distributions and binomial distribution are very useful components so far as business analytics is concerned. So, until unless you clear about the probability concept, probability distribution, sampling concept and sampling distributions, so you may not be in a position to do very good what we can say that effective experiment or effective empirical testing to get some kind of insight as per your management requirement. So, management decision altogether cannot be very effective, or you cannot come to a perfect management decision until unless you clear about the probability distribution, sampling and sampling distribution, because probability distribution and sampling distributions are kind of requirements, and you can say that it is a preconditions, or without understanding or without having sufficient knowledge, you may not in a position to analyze effectively any kind of business problem. So, likewise we have already discussed several kind of structures. So, this is actually snapshot about the how you have to operate in the case of Excel spreadsheet to generate the kind of sampling distribution corresponding to particular probability distribution. So, these are the commands which you can apply. Go to the Excel spreadsheet and following a particular, if you understand that this particular problem follows actually binomial distribution, then randomly generate a kind of series, and that can be used for testing something like that. Similarly, if you know that this is a normally kind of structure, then you can create a sampling distribution which can follow normal distribution patterns. Like this, you have to follow a kind of structure, and the idea is that you have to understand the kind of concepts, and means it is a kind of a random sampling process altogether, and these are all very useful for any kind of forecasting. I will cite here couple of practical examples where this probability distribution, sampling and sampling distributions are very useful for predicting certain events, right. For instance, we have discussed earlier the kind of capital budgeting, that is project evaluations, that is usually in the management, and that too in finance area. One way of evaluating capital budgeting is called as profitability index, right. Profitability index is nothing but present ratio between present value of future cash flows divided by initial cash flows, that is initial investment. And while doing all these things, you will be connected with probability distributions. Until unless you know probability, then you are not in a position to calculate the kind of feasibility. For instance, we have discussed a concept called as a net present value criteria, which is nothing but actually means we are interested to know what is the present value of future cash flows over the times, right, with respect to time. So, this is actually connected with the cash flows with discounting rate, and the discounting rate, that means if you keep cash flows constant followed by the discounting rates, that is nothing but actually cash flows multiplied by 1 plus discounting rate, then it will continue over the time. So, 1 by 1 plus r follows a kind of structure which is nothing but called as a probability structures. So, this is actually called as a probability distribution. So, that means, so what I like to say that probability distribution has a well connection with all these kind of forecasting or prediction. So, that is how it is highly required for any kind of business analytics or business requirement. Similarly, so this is how the kind of examples which I have already cited. So, once you means same things it is case of probability distribution and sampling distribution. If you know the kind of structure, you can generate the samples, and if your random variables are there and you specify a particular distribution, you can calculate a probability with a particular or with a particular specific case subject to specification of a random values of the random variable. So, this is how the kind of examples which you can follow and generate the series for capital budgeting, and then you can plot, and you will find this will follow a particular distributions, right. And with this I will there is actually risk solver platforms where all kinds of distributions are there. So, you will find here plenty of distributions are there, and that will give you some kind of structure through which the business can be connected, or business can be evaluated as per the kind of need and requirement. So, again, so the kind of submission is so you must be acquainted with all these concepts, so that you can connect properly as per the need, and then you can take some kind of management decision. So, this is another kind of examples, and which you can solve through this particular modality. And so, again, so these are the kind of structure. This is actually kind of airline passenger data, and you can create structures, then follow kind of histogram, then you have to check whether it is normally distributed or not, something similar kind of examples. And so, the data modeling and distribution fitting. So, this is actually why you need all these things. We need to find out a particular efficient structures, what we call as goodness of fit. Okay. So, all these things will help you to bring a kind of environment, and that what we can call as efficient environment, where your prediction or kind of observation will be very effective as per your business needs. And until unless you will be acquainted with all these concept and the kind of structure and spreadsheets, so you will not in a position to analyze properly. So, you will be actually give you effective kind of solution, or best kind of solutions once you know, or you will be acquainted with all these kind of requirements and spreadsheet use. So, because this will give you, since it is a kind of continuous affairs, so you must have a kind of knowledge how you have to operate all these items, depending upon the understanding of a particular structure and the kind of problem requirement. So, once you will be acquainted, by default it will give you very useful findings, or kind of insights that will help you lot to solve some of the business problems as per your need. Okay. So, like this we have a plenty of such examples, and you can go through this kind of structure, and these are all this particular unit keywords, and we have discussed all these kind of concept. And by the way, so till today we have discussed the unit 1, unit 2 and unit 3, and these are all actually basics actually, and all these basics are very useful for future course of discussions, particularly inferential analytics, predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. So, my suggestion is that you must be very acquainted with all these concept and the kind of tools and spreadsheets, so that the future discussion will be very handy, and you can pick up very quickly. So, with this we will stop here. Thank you very much. Have a nice time.